We often receive a lot of information from the mass media. When we feel that this issue is extremely relevant to us, we will be very concerned and carefully analyze it, but when this issue is not so relevant to ourselves, however, we will selectively ignore it. Also will not make much analyzation. Think about it. Have you ever done these actions without even knowing it? Today we're going to talk about the elaboration likelihood model, which was proposed in 1986 by psychologists Richard Petty and John Cacioppo. When we receive information, we show different thinking and degree of scrutiny. People's understanding of information, involvement, motivations, and abilities are different, so even the same information received will have different processing methods. This not only affects people's thinking patterns and decision-making attitudes but also affects the extent to which people collect and evaluate the message. For example, if you need to sell a product to a customer, but your customer is very familiar with that product and knows exactly what he wants, at this time customer's brain will make the thinking process into the central root, to carefully examine the details you have provided and make rational judgments. To persuade the customer of this type we need to refer to a lot of actual data. Also, the information you need to provide will be very logical, and customers will not be persuaded by you easily. But if customers don't know much about the field that related to the message, they will analyze the message from other additional parts, which may be the professional level of the enterprise, the attitude of the reception staff, the additional bonus, or the emotional feeling when they use the product. Therefore, we must pay more attention to emotional persuasion and added value to convince customers. When consumers are engaged in an issue-relevant thinking process, if they have sufficient motivation for the message and have sufficient cognitive ability to think and judge the message, the elaboration likelihood will increase. When individual processing information, the thinking process will be divided into two types of persuasion routes according to the individual's involvement in the issue. The two routes are the central route and the peripheral route. Which thinking route to take depends on the motivation and ability of the individual to think about the message. Also, the individual's cognitive needs and involvement toward the message are important factors that affect their motivation of thinking. The choice of path will ultimately determine our attitude towards the message, which in turn affects our behavior. First, let's discuss the part of involvement. In addition to motivation and ability, personal relevance and the original attitude toward the issue are also the main factors that affect the choice of the route when receiving persuasive messages. When the involvement is high, the individual pays more attention to the argument quality of the message. Conversely, when the involvement is low, the individual pays less attention to the argument quality of the message. Now let's look at the central route and the peripheral route separately. First, let's talk about the central route. If the individual's motivation and involvement toward the message is high or the message is attractive and highly controversial to the individual and requires high cognitive thinking skills, the individual's issue-relevant thinking likelihood will increase. Attitudes towards the information are influenced by the rational persuasive message composed of evidence and facts. Individuals think objectively and rationally while processing and analyze the information, and the thinking process is based on cognition than emotion. Individuals will put more cognitive effort into receiving and processing the message. For example, the audiences who are very concerned about political issues will pay more attention to the candidate's political opinions. Even search or discuss political opinions about candidates on the internet. Such a process represents the individual's thinking process going on the central route. The peripheral route, however, represents that when individuals receive a message, they are not interested in the content or it has little to do with themselves. The level of motivation and involvement to the persuasive messages is low. Or individuals do not have enough cognitive ability to evaluate information. The above factors will lead the way of thinking to the peripheral route. At this time, the key to persuading individuals is emotional factors. For example, the humorous advertising than the rational one, the packaging of a product, and the additional value of products. These message contents are also called peripheral cues. When the shift of attitude is through the central route, the attitude is easier to remain, the individual's behavior is more predictive, and the individual has a higher resistance to counter-persuasion. On the contrary, if the attitude is formed by the peripheral route, the attitude is more susceptible to change, the duration of attitude is shorter, and the behavior prediction is less accurate. The elaboration likelihood model has been widely used in consumer behavior prediction and advertising design research. Through elaboration likelihood model, we can better understand the different behavior patterns of consumers in choosing high-involvement products and low-involvement products. However, as the theory of emotional persuasion became more complete, people began to notice the lack of the model. For example, the complexity of emotional factors, and emotions will also affect the cognitive processing and route choice. Even so, elaboration likelihood model is still an effective persuasion and communication skill. Not only in the face of customers, we often have these situations in our work. When we want to persuade the supervisor to accept a proposal, the supervisor may originally have great expectations and concerns about that project. Therefore, our proposal will be carefully judged and analyzed. But if the supervisor doesn't have much requirements for the project, or even fully authorized, he will be easier to accept our proposal. Just because everyone thinks in a different way, the degree of concern for things will be different. It can be seen from elaboration likelihood model that when we want to persuade others, we need to understand how much they care about the issue. If the content of the message is something they care about, we will need to prepare complete and detailed information for them. If the involvement level toward the issue is low, we can use other methods to achieve the persuasion. Now we know, next time before we try to convince someone, observe their prior attitude and involvement toward the issue before we made the persuasive message. This is the elaboration likelihood model. Hope you enjoy the theory. Have you ever been in a similar situation related to this theory? Where do you think this theory can be applied to our daily life? Looking back, have you ever been persuaded by this type of message?